Hey guys, let's go over how layer masks and clipping masks work in Photoshop. This is a really useful technique. Use it all the time, and I think it's worth sharing and understanding what they're capable of and what you can do with them. So I'm opening a new document here real quick, and I'm just going to make a new layer. And right off the basics, I'm just going to put some paint down, and we'll work with it, and I'll explain to you what it does. So here we go. We got some paint down there. So the simplest explanation I come up with is that they will opt to show or hide parts of your layer or folder or whatever you put the mask on. To add a mask to a layer, go to your layer palette and go down here. It's this little rectangle with the circle cut out of it. If you click that, you'll notice it adds this extra little thumbnail to your layer there. Now this is your layer mask. It's all white right now, which means that the entirety of your layer is showing. If we go in here, we have it selected, I'll click it again just in case, and we go down to a dark color, it will carve away at whatever image you have. And it is opacity sensitive, so you can kind of only do it halfway if you want. If we come in here with a soft brush, we could kind of hide stuff slowly. What's really nice about these is that they are non-destructive, which means we can right click and delete it or disable it, which will let us see that full image again. So as you're probably thinking, this is a pretty handy thing. You could also apply the layer mask, which will permanently change the image you had on that layer. So this is really useful. It can also be done off of a selection. So I'm going to get rid of this, and we can go ahead and change to one of our selection tools. Quick tip about this is if you hold shift, it will lock it to a square shape. And if you press spacebar as well, you can move your selection around. So if you're ever trying to make a selection and you're like, oh, I wanted it to actually be higher, just press your spacebar and you could slide that around. You can also, I believe, what is it? We'll play around with the circle one. But so now that we have a selection, we could go ahead and hit that button again, and it's only going to show that. So you made a layer mask on there that is only showing the area that you had selected. Now we can also undo that. If I hold Alt and click it, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to cut that part out. Another thing to be of note here is if you click this little chain icon in between, that's actually linking. I didn't click it yet. That's actually linking the mask to your layer. So this is useful in the fact that you can toggle it and then move independently either your layer mask or the layer itself. So that has some uses as well. So I'm going to get rid of that mask again. Other ways that you can select, remember you have your lasso tools available. Another tip there is that if you're using a polygonal lasso tool and hold Alt, then you could switch to your the more organic version of your lasso tool. And if you let go of Alt again, you're right back to the polygonal one. So this is really useful if you need to get two types of selections going there. And again, we can clip it out if we want. And then lastly, another selection tip is that in Photoshop, if you press Q, you go into quick mask mode. Some of you might have accidentally run into this, like I've done in the past, and you're all of a sudden you're painting like this red color and you're like, well, what's going on? And how do I get rid of it? So Q is the hotkey for that. And this actually can be really useful because it lets you select things by painting it. So I press Q again to toggle it, so I can do that, and maybe I'll go in and I'll make a soft selection here. You could also see it right on your toolbar right here. So if I toggle it, you can see the difference. And then again, go ahead and mask, however, which way you want to do it, and boom. So there's a couple other ways you can do this before I show you things that we can use it for. So another way you can do a mask is called a clipping mask. So a little different than the layer mask. If we create a new layer and then hold Alt, and we see that little button, that little box pointing downwards. So if we click that, now you see the little arrow pointing to the layer underneath it. So now if we try to paint, I'm gonna pick a different color. If we try to paint in there, you'll notice it's only painting within those pixels. And this is really useful because you could block out a shape and then keep your silhouette nice and tight, or keep all that paint within, you know, that previous shape. So this is really useful. You can disable it again by holding Alt and clicking between them, and now you can see all those pixels are still there. So again, a non-destructive way to do it. You can also create another layer and drag it in between, and that will also create another layer that is clipped to the same kind of master layer down there, but it will still be under like your regular layer priority, the layer above it. So you can do pretty cool things with that. And then you can collapse these down, you know, with Control E or right click, merge down, and this will kind of save it there, right? So now it's one layer. Another way you can make a layer mask, maybe not from this one, a selection, is by control clicking your little thumbnail. So if I made a new layer and I control click this one, it's going to give me that as a selection. And so now I can just paint within that as well. So it's a really nice way to make selections, is by control clicking the thumbnail of a layer you have. It can be very useful, you know, in many ways. So for example, if I had, let's say, just a couple boxes here, and now I can go ahead and fill those. And if I ever want to have that as a selection again, right, I could hide that and just keep that purely as a selection in the background or whatnot. But control clicking, even if it's invisible, and now I could paint within those boxes. So that's great. Another thing I wanted to bring up is this little button right here, which is lock transparency. So anything that's transparent, so if I turn this layer off, it will make so you can't paint on it. So this is really nice and useful. It's kind of like another way around using a layer or clipping mask, is that I can go ahead now and click that button, and if I try painting, it's only going to paint in the visible pixels. So if you want to keep your layers a little more organized without having a bunch of extra ones, but this is the most destructive way to do it because you're actually painting on those pixels. But it can be really useful, for example, if you have like a silhouette. So if I get rid of this one, and we'll go in and use a hard brush, and we'll just, like, you know, plot something out there. And now if I click that button and I can go in, and now all of a sudden paint just within that without having to worry about going outside the lines, that's pretty cool and that's pretty useful. So I'm sure you could see some value in that. Now, outside of that, another thing I would use these for is, let's get some, let's see here. For example, I'll put in curves or levels or something like that. And I want this to be really bright and that to be dark, but you don't want it to be everywhere. Now you see when you put that curves, it has a layer mask on it already. So now that you know how to use those, you could go in, make sure it's selected, and you could say where you want that brightness to appear. So I might invert that, Control I, and then I could paint back in, making sure that I have the color white selected to show it, or however much I want to show it along the value range. And I could paint in just those areas. And so I like to use this a lot while texturing to bring out highlights, right? So I'll go in and I'll just say, okay, I want to highlight here, and I want this to be brighter over there. And I can adjust my curves afterwards and say, okay, you know, I wanted it brighter or I wanted it dimmer. And this is really a nice way that if you have highlights on, you know, if you're doing like a brick texture, or, you know, a character, and you know where you want those all to be, but you're not sure how much that you want to handle them yet, you could go back in afterwards and just edit that. So that's really nice to be able to have that level of control. All right, I think that's all I wanted to show you in regards to layer mask and quick mask. So to recap, you got this button down here that will allow you to create a layer mask. You can create it from a selection. by selecting something first, either by control clicking the thumbnail there or making a selection normally, or again with your quick mask. Then once you have it selected, pop that button in. You could unchain it to move it separate from your paint. And then if you want to make a clipping mask, alt click in between. And you'll lock what you're painting to the pixels underneath. Really useful. Get to know them, play with them a bunch until they're pretty much second nature to you, and they'll save your butt big time in a lot of ways, and it's really a great way to work non-destructively. As a quick addendum, when I was talking about the circle one in regards to selection, so when we select with the rectangle, as I mentioned, spacebar lets you move it around, shift lets you lock it to being a square. So if we pull out our elliptical tool, we can do similar things with circle selection. Holding shift is going to lock it to be a circle, but what I was trying to remember before is that in addition to holding space to move it around, if you hold alt, it's going to make that selection from the center of where you originally clicked. So this is really useful if you're trying to get in the middle of stuff. So if I click here and hold alt, it's going to see how it grows out from the center there. And if I don't use alt and I click that same spot, it's just going from where I originally clicked to where I'm clicking now. So we could tap alt and see the difference. Same with spacebar. Very useful. This also works just as well with the rectangular marquee. So clicking alt, it's coming out from the center, and shift for square.